Top of mind is going to be the Nancy Guthrie investigation tonight. Some breaking
we are
news coming into the newsroom within the past half hour or so. Fox News Digital's Michael Ruiz with this, saying that there seems to be a little bit of a disconnect between the local authorities there in southern Arizona and some of the federal agents like the FBI that have been working on this investigation. Ruiz with this, saying Sheriff Nanos, he's with the Pima County Sheriff's Department, Nanos sent a glove recovered from inside the home to a private lab in Florida rather than the FBI's lab in Virginia, according to a source. The feds will likely need to retest themselves, wasting time, he says. Ruiz also sent something out earlier saying that a federal source confirmed to him that the Arizona sheriff has blocked the FBI from key evidence in the Guthrie case.
I've said from the beginning, and actually even at our last press conference, the FBI and the Pima County Sheriff's Department are connected at the hip. That has not changed. Decisions are made sometimes with a good discussion about why things need to go one way or the other. In this instance, it really was about, and it's not just this. We're going to use a judge for a search warrant. Do we do a federal judge or do we do a state judge? We have a discussion. What's the best way to do that? And decisions are made. They're really not my decisions. They are our team's decisions. They get together and they talk about what they think is best.
93 days. That is how long Nancy Guthrie has been missing. 93 days since an 84-year-old woman was taken from her home in the middle of the night in Tucson, Arizona. 93 days since her family started waiting for answers that have not come. 93 days since the FBI identified a masked suspect on a doorbell camera, and the world started watching. And this week, the FBI told us something that should stop every single person following this case cold. 2 months ago, they asked for the DNA. The sheriff said no. That is not a leak. That is not a rumor circulating in online forums. That is not an allegation from a political opponent or a frustrated community member. That is a statement posted publicly this week on X by Ben Williamson, the Assistant Director for Public Affairs at the Federal Bureau of Investigation. His name, his title, his words, on the record. For every journalist, every investigator, every family member, and every person who has spent 3 months asking why this case has produced no arrest, to read, he wrote, and these are his exact words, "The FBI asked to test this DNA 2 months ago with the same technology we have always had, when the local sheriff instead sent it to a private lab." Read that one more time, slowly. The FBI asked. They had the technology. They were ready. And the sheriff sent Nancy Guthrie's DNA somewhere else. For 2 months, while Savannah Guthrie sat behind a television anchor desk trying to hold herself together on national television, while Nancy's family woke up every morning to the same silence, while this community spent hundreds of hours analyzing footage and walking washes and submitting tips and demanding answers, while the investigation produced no arrest, no named suspect, and no confirmed breakthrough. The DNA evidence from inside Nancy Guthrie's home, the evidence that a senior FBI official now confirms the Bureau was prepared to analyze 60 days ago, was sitting in a private laboratory in Florida. Not at Quantico, not in federal hands, in Florida, because the sheriff made a different call. And the question that nobody in an official capacity has answered yet is the one that matters most. What did those 60 days cost? What could the FBI have found in those 2 months that the private lab could not? And does that gap, 60 days of delayed federal analysis on the most critical piece of forensic evidence in an active kidnapping case, matter for where Nancy Guthrie is right now? Nancy Guthrie is 84 years old. She is the mother of Savannah Guthrie, co-host of NBC's Today Show. A photograph taken at a family gathering shows her smiling, warmly dressed, the kind of woman whose presence fills a room without demanding it. She was reported missing from her home in the Catalina Foothills neighborhood of Tucson, Arizona on the morning of February 1, 2026, after having dinner with family the night before. Her son-in-law, Tommaso Cioni, dropped her off at her residence. She went inside. The door closed, and she was never seen again. Blood was found on her front porch. Her phone was still inside the house. Her daily medication was untouched. The FBI released doorbell camera footage in February showing a masked male suspect outside her front door on the night she disappeared, carrying a backpack, wearing gloves, holding a flashlight in his mouth. That footage is the clearest public image investigators have produced of the person believed to be responsible for taking her. More than 90 days later, that person has not been publicly identified. No arrest has been made. No suspect has been named. The investigation has moved through multiple forensic threads in those 90 days. The Walmart backpack lead, the tire impression analysis on the decomposed Granite Circle driveway, the pacemaker data question, the DNA mixture problem. Each one has been tracked carefully by the investigators, by the experts who have spoken publicly about this case, and by the community that has refused to let Nancy Guthrie's name fade from public attention. But the DNA has always been the thread with the most direct path to a name. Sheriff Chris Nanos confirmed early in the investigation that DNA evidence recovered from inside Nancy Guthrie's home contained the genetic material of an unknown male, someone with no documented reason to have been inside that house, someone whose profile did not match any record in CODIS, the FBI's national database of convicted offenders. That confirmation sent the investigation toward investigative genetic genealogy, the same forensic technique that identified the Golden State Killer after more than 4 decades. The technique requires a specific type of genetic profile, ASNP profile, generated from the crime scene DNA and uploaded to consumer genealogy databases, where partial matches with distant relatives can begin building a family tree that leads back to the suspect. It has worked in hundreds of cases. C.C. Moore, the chief genetic genealogist at Parabon Nanolabs, confirmed early in this investigation that if a viable profile could be extracted from the evidence, she believed identification would follow within weeks. The obstacle, as this channel covered in detail, was the nature of the sample itself. The DNA recovered from inside Nancy's home exists as a complex mixture, genetic material from multiple contributors collected from surfaces inside a home where she had lived for decades. Separating that mixture into a clean, individual profile suitable for genealogy database searching requires deconvolution software that, as of earlier this year, did not exist in a form advanced enough to handle the specific complexity of this sample. Sheriff Nanos sent the sample to DNA Labs International, a private laboratory in Florida, to work on that problem. And for months, the investigation waited. What most people following this case did not know, and what Ben Williamson's statement this week has now put firmly on the public record, is that the FBI was not simply standing by while the Florida lab worked. The FBI asked to test the DNA 2 months ago. They had the technology, they had the capability, they were ready. The sheriff sent it to the private lab instead. A timeline graphic showing the 2-month gap between the FBI's request and the sample's eventual transfer to federal custody tells a story that no press conference has told directly. 60 days. The FBI waiting. The private lab struggling with a mixture that its own process could not resolve. And now, according to sources who spoke to ABC News, the FBI is running advanced analysis on the same sample using technology that represents a meaningful step beyond what was previously applied. But here is where this story takes a turn that changes the weight of everything that came before it. Because the DNA evidence in this case is not only the complex blood mixture that has defined the forensic conversation for 3 months. According to reporting from News Nation this week, the evidence package includes something else entirely. Something that does not face the same mixture problem. Something that C.C. Moore, the woman who has solved more than 300 cold cases using genetic genealogy, went on the record this week to describe in terms that stopped everyone paying attention to this case in their tracks. A hair. And what Moore said about that hair is the reason this investigation may be closer to naming the person on that doorbell camera than it has been at any point in the 90 days since Nancy Guthrie disappeared. A hair is not the same as a blood sample. That distinction sounds simple, but understanding it is the difference between understanding why the DNA investigation has been stalled for 3 months and understanding why this week's development changes the picture in a way that nothing else in this investigation has managed to do. When Sheriff Nanos confirmed in February that the DNA recovered from inside Nancy Guthrie's home was mixed, he was describing a specific forensic problem rooted in the nature of blood evidence collected from a residential environment. Blood deposited on surfaces inside a home where someone has lived for decades does not exist in isolation. It sits alongside years of biological material from the person who lives there, from family members who visit, from caregivers, from contractors, from anyone who has spent time in that space across months and years of ordinary life. When a forensic team swabs those surfaces, everything comes up together. Nancy's own DNA, present on every surface in that house, in concentrations built up across decades of daily living, competes directly with the genetic material left by whoever was inside that home on the night of January 31st. That competition is the mixture problem, and it is what has kept the investigation's DNA pathway blocked since February. A hair is different in a specific and critical way. A hair with the follicle intact, what forensic scientists call a hair with an attached root, contains nuclear DNA in the cells of the follicle itself. That nuclear DNA belongs to whoever grew that hair. It is not a surface deposit competing with background biological noise from multiple contributors. It is a single contributor sample. If the hair recovered from inside Nancy Guthrie's home came from the person who took her, and if the root is intact, the forensic pathway that has been blocked by the mixture problem does not apply to it. C.C. Moore addressed this directly in her News Nation interview this week. Her words were precise, and they were unambiguous. She said, "If they really do have a rootless hair and it is from that kidnapper, then this is going to be the piece of information that will solve the case." A photograph of a forensic hair sample under laboratory lighting, the kind of image familiar from evidence documentation in federal cases, illustrates what investigators are working with: a single strand. Potentially the most important piece of physical evidence this investigation has produced. Moore's statement deserves to be heard in the context of everything she has said about this case since February. She is not someone who speaks carelessly about active investigations. When she said in February that identification through genetic genealogy would follow within weeks of obtaining a viable profile, she was describing a technical capability, not making a promise. When she later said the mixed blood sample was a complex mixture that current software could not reliably deconvolve, she was being honest about a forensic limitation at the frontier of what the science could do. And when she said this week that the hair absolutely can make the case solvable, she was not offering hope as a comfort. She was making a forensic assessment based on direct professional experience with exactly this category of evidence. 300 cases. That is how many C.C. Moore has contributed to solving through genetic genealogy. She knows what a viable hair sample can produce. She knows what the databases contain and how quickly a family tree can be built once a clean SNP profile is uploaded. When she says this hair can solve the case, the investigative community that has been following this story understands exactly what that means. But now bring in the second thread of this week's developments, because the hair does not exist in isolation from the institutional story that Ben Williamson's statement has put on the public record. And that institutional story has implications that go beyond the forensic pathway. Williamson confirmed this week that the FBI asked to test the DNA 2 months ago. The sheriff sent it to a private lab instead. That sequence, now documented publicly by a named senior federal official, raises a question that this community has been asking in different forms since the earliest days of this investigation. Has the Pima County Sheriff's Department, under Sheriff Chris Nanos, made decisions about how this investigation is managed that have slowed the path to answers? The record on that question is not thin. Former United States Surgeon General and former Pima County Sheriff Richard Carmona stated publicly that the crime scene in this case had been permanently corrupted. He used that word deliberately, permanently. He said Sheriff Nanos made a fundamental error by personally declaring the scene open before the lead detective had completed evidence collection, a decision, Carmona said, that a sheriff does not make. That call belongs to the lead detective after all evidence has been photographed, bagged, tagged, and documented. A document filed with the Pima County Board of Supervisors reflects the formal no-confidence vote that the Pima County Deputies Organization, made up of Nanos's own deputies, issued against him unanimously on March 24th. Not a public petition, not outside critics. His own people, the officers who work under him every day, voted unanimously that they do not have confidence in his leadership. The Board of Supervisors voted to require Nanos to answer questions under oath about his work history and his management of the department. A recall effort is active and moving forward. Reporting from Fox News Digital and News Nation, confirmed through multiple sources with knowledge of the department, found that the sergeant initially placed in charge of the homicide unit assigned to the Guthrie case had never personally investigated a homicide before being placed in charge of the unit. Only one detective on the initial squad had more than 3 years on the homicide team. And now, added to that documented record, is Ben Williamson's public statement confirming that the FBI asked for the DNA 2 months ago, and the sheriff sent it to a private lab instead. Each of those details, taken alone, tells a story about institutional management. Taken together, they form a documented pattern of decisions made at the county level that credentialed, named, on-record voices have described as consequential for how this investigation has unfolded. Nanos has disputed these characterizations consistently. He said he had no regrets about any decision he or his team made. He called criticisms of his handling of the case silly. He defended his supervisor by name and cited specific, solved cases. His account is part of the public record, and it has been stated repeatedly. But the institutional record that now surrounds his management of this investigation, including a senior FBI official's public statement about the DNA timeline, is also part of the public record. And it is a record that continues to grow. There is one more element of this week's developments that deserves careful attention. The Sheriff's Department responded to the reports about the DNA evidence by confirming that the private Florida lab continues to share information with the FBI lab and other partner labs across the country. Partner labs, plural. Multiple institutions now working on the same evidence simultaneously. And the sheriff's statement included a phrase that this community should note carefully. DNA analysis remains ongoing. Not completed, not resolved. Ongoing. Which means the hair that C.C. Moore says can solve this case is currently inside a federal laboratory, being analyzed with technology that the FBI describes as the same technology they have always had, and that sources familiar with the investigation describe as advanced analysis, representing a new phase of testing. Those two descriptions, the FBI's public statement and the sourced reporting to ABC News, do not fully align. And that gap between what the FBI said publicly and what sources told ABC News about the nature of the testing now underway is a thread that has not yet been resolved in the public record. A document showing the timeline of the DNA evidence, from its collection at Nancy's home in early February, through the transfer to the Florida lab, through the FBI's request 2 months ago, through this week's confirmation that federal testing is now underway, tells a story about 60 days and what they cost. And it leads directly to the question that Part 3 will examine. What does this mean for the investigation right now? And what does accountability look like when the forensic record and the institutional record are both pointing in the same direction? Here is what this week has confirmed, what remains analytically supported but unverified, and what is still entirely unknown. Because after 90 days of following this investigation, this community deserves the honest version of exactly where things stand. What is confirmed on the public record this week is this. Ben Williamson, Assistant Director for Public Affairs at the FBI, stated publicly on X that the FBI asked to test the DNA evidence 2 months ago, using the same technology the Bureau has always had, and that the local sheriff instead sent it to a private lab. The DNA evidence includes a hair, confirmed by News Nation. C.C. Moore told News Nation this week that the hair absolutely can make the case solvable, and that if they really do have a rootless hair from the kidnapper, it is going to be the piece of information that solves the case. The Pima County Sheriff's Department confirmed that DNA analysis remains ongoing and that the Florida private lab continues to share information with the FBI lab and other partner labs. ABC News reported, citing sources familiar with the investigation, that the FBI is now conducting advanced analysis on the sample. Nancy Guthrie has been missing since February 1, 2026. No suspect has been publicly named. No arrest has been made. What is analytically supported but not confirmed by law enforcement on the record is the connection between the 2-month delay and its specific forensic consequences. We do not know what the FBI would have found in those 60 days had the sample been sent to Quantico when the Bureau first requested it. We do not know whether the hair was among the evidence the FBI specifically asked to test 2 months ago, or whether it was identified as significant more recently. We do not know whether the root of the hair is intact, which is the specific detail that determines whether nuclear DNA suitable for SNP profiling can be extracted from it. C.C. Moore used the phrase rootless hair in her statement, which in forensic terminology refers to a hair shed naturally, without the follicle root attached. A rootless hair yields mitochondrial DNA rather than nuclear DNA. Mitochondrial DNA can confirm maternal lineage, but cannot produce the individual SNP profile required for investigative genetic genealogy database searching. If the hair is rootless, the forensic pathway it opens is narrower than Moore's statement might suggest to a general audience, though she was clear that it can still make the case solvable. That distinction matters, and it is the kind of detail that this channel will not gloss over because this community has been following the forensic specifics of this investigation carefully enough to deserve precision rather than comfort. What is still entirely unknown is the most important thing: where Nancy Guthrie is. Whether the FBI's analysis of the hair will produce a viable profile, whether that profile, if produced, will find a match in the genealogy databases, and whether the 60-day gap between the FBI's request and the eventual transfer of the sample had any measurable impact on the evidence itself, on its integrity, on its viability, or on the investigation's timeline. Now let us address the institutional dimension of this week's developments directly, because it cannot be separated from the forensic story, and this community understands that. Ben Williamson's statement is the most significant public institutional development in this investigation since Richard Carmona called the crime scene permanently corrupted. Every prior criticism of Sheriff Nanos came from former officials, from community members, from his own deputies through the formal no-confidence vote, and from the Board of Supervisors through their formal accountability process. Serious voices, credentialed voices, voices that deserve to be taken seriously, and were covered on this channel with exactly that seriousness. But this week, the criticism came from the FBI itself, from a named senior official, in a public statement attributed to the Bureau. That is a categorically different kind of institutional rebuke. It is not a former colleague's opinion. It is not a community's frustration. It is the federal agency co-leading this investigation going on record to say that they asked for this evidence 2 months ago and did not receive it because the sheriff made a different decision. A photograph of Ben Williamson's post on X, the text visible and attributed, represents something this investigation has not produced before. A federal official publicly documenting an institutional decision made at the county level that affected the trajectory of a kidnapping case. That documentation is now permanent. It is time-stamped. It is in the public record. and it sits alongside every other entry in the documented history of how this investigation has been managed at the county level. Nanos sent the DNA to a private lab in Florida. He has defended that choice. His defenders have argued that the private lab had specific SNP profiling capability that even the FBI does not have in-house. C.C. Moore herself took a measured position on the lab choice earlier in the investigation, noting that the private lab allowed CODIS analysis and SNP profiling to run simultaneously, which in theory saved time. Those arguments are part of the record, and they deserve to be acknowledged honestly. But the FBI's public statement this week does not engage with those arguments. It simply states what happened. The FBI asked, the sheriff sent it elsewhere. And for 2 months, the Federal Bureau's own forensic capability was not applied to the most critical piece of evidence in an active kidnapping case involving an 84-year-old woman. The accountability question this raises is not rhetorical. The Pima County Board of Supervisors has already required Nanos to answer questions under oath. The recall effort against him is active. His own deputies issued a unanimous no-confidence vote. And now the FBI has added its institutional voice to a public record that continues to document decisions made at the county level and their consequences. This community has been part of holding that accountability structure in place, not through accusation, not through speculation, through sustained, specific, evidence-based attention that has kept Nancy Guthrie's name in front of the people who have the authority and the responsibility to find her. That attention has mattered. It has been documented across this investigation in ways that go beyond comment sections and view counts. Independent investigators walked the washes and found clothing. Community analysts identified details in the doorbell footage that formal coverage missed. This channel covered the DNA deconvolution problem in detail before it entered mainstream coverage of the case. The pacemaker evidence question was raised here before it became part of the broader analytical conversation. The Walmart backpack silence was examined here when other coverage had moved on. And now, this week, with the FBI confirming they have the DNA, with C.C. Moore saying the hair can solve the case, with a senior federal official publicly documenting a 2-month institutional decision that kept the Bureau's own forensic capability away from the evidence, the investigation has reached a moment that feels different from any point in the previous 90 days. Not because an arrest is imminent. We do not know that. Not because the hair will definitively produce a viable profile. We do not know that either. But because the forensic pathway that has been blocked since February now has 2 things it did not have before: the FBI's direct involvement with the evidence, and a specific piece of biological material that the world's leading forensic genealogist says can solve this case. Here is the question we want you to answer in the comments. Do you believe the 2-month delay caused by the sheriff's decision to use the private Florida lab instead of the FBI had a measurable impact on this investigation? Or do you think the evidence was preserved well enough that the delay will ultimately make no difference to the outcome? This community's analysis on that question matters. The people reading those comments are paying attention. If you have been following the Nancy Guthrie investigation on this channel and you are not yet subscribed, now is the moment. This case is moving. The FBI has the DNA. The hair is in a federal laboratory. C.C. Moore has said publicly what a viable result from that evidence means for this investigation. Every development will be covered here as it happens, with named sources, documented facts, and the kind of sustained analytical attention that 90 days of an unanswered investigation demands. Nancy Guthrie has been missing since February 1, 2026. She is someone's mother. She is someone's grandmother. She is the woman whose absence has been felt every day by a family that has been waiting longer than any family should have to wait. This channel will be here for every answer that comes. If you have any information related to the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie, contact the FBI at 1-800-CALL-FBI or submit a tip at tips.fbi.gov. You can submit that information completely anonymously. A reward of up to $1 million is available for information leading to answers in this case. This content is for informational purposes only. No individuals are being accused of any crime. All information presented is based on publicly available reports, named on-record sources, and verified mainstream media reporting, including statements from the FBI, the Pima County Sheriff's Department, ABC News, and News Nation. Ben Williamson's statement quoted in this video was made publicly on X and is attributed to him directly. C.C. Moore's statements were made publicly to News Nation and are attributed to her directly. Analytical inferences are explicitly labeled as such throughout. All persons referenced are presumed innocent unless proven otherwise in a court of law. This channel has no affiliation with the Guthrie family, law enforcement, or any party to this investigation.